Good evening, one and all. Thank you for joining us in African Leadership, in the third African Leadership Academy's Redefine Expectations webinar series. Tonight, our theme, our focus is shaping the future of education in Africa. My name is Mopati Morake. I'm on the faculty here at African Leadership Academy, and I have been since 2011. And tonight it is my distinct honor and privilege to welcome three of our alumni who are now leaders in the education space on the continent to this panel. I am first going to welcome Deborah Kalala, ALA's class of 2014. Deborah is from the Democratic Republic of Congo, and while a university student, founded Manas School in Kinshasa, which aims to offer high quality, affordable education to pre-primary and primary school students. Our second panelist graduated in ALA and is from the ALA class of 2011. It's Ngor Majak Anyieth. He is the founder and president of Education Bridge, a nonprofit organization in South Sudan that is building a network of schools to foster peace building and leadership development across South Sudan. Our third distinguished panelist tonight is Jihad Hajjuji, ALA class of 2008. That's our inaugural class. Jihad hails from Morocco and is heading our AL for Education network, which is a network of educational enthusiasts and practitioners that spans the African continent. So Jihad, Majak, and Deborah, welcome, bienvenue, karibu sana. And to all of you joining us, whether that's on Facebook or on Zoom, wherever you are in the world, wherever you are on the continent, it is good to have you with us as we think about what education can, should, must look like going forward. Just a little bit of admin. We're going to go for an hour tonight. I will engage with the panelists for the first portion of this webinar, but if you do have a question, a burning question that you'd like to one of the panelists to answer, please, you can type it into the chat function on the webinar on Zoom. If you like a question that you see somebody else answer, please click like. That question will get filtered up and hopefully we'll be able to answer it. If you're tuning in on Facebook Live, feel free to type your question there and then that'll get sent to me and hopefully we'll have time to get the question. So that's the main way we can expect to engage with our distinguished panel this evening. So I want to frame this conversation about the future of education in Africa by acknowledging the difficult moment that we're in. COVID-19 is a pandemic that has shifted how we think and how we operate. And so in African Leadership Academy, in seminal readings, we just read a text by Arundhati Roy. It's called The Pandemic is a Portal. Arundhati Roy, Indian author, writes, historically, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine their world anew. This one is no different. It is a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. We can choose to walk through it, dragging the carcasses of our prejudice and hatred, our avarice, our data banks and dead ideas, our dead rivers and smoky skies behind us. Or we can walk through lightly with little luggage, ready to imagine another world and ready to fight for it. So I'm pleased to have these three panelists who are ready to imagine and fight for a new world in education, a new possibility for learning and teaching, empowerment in Africa. So let me start by asking this question. What calls you to build a school? Majak, as you think about education, as you think about the future, tell us a little bit about the moment that called you to say, I need to build a school. I need to build a school.
Thank you, Mr. Mopati, and welcome everybody. My call to building a school has been a gradual process, but I think it stemmed from my desire for peace and economic prosperity in my country, South Sudan. For context, I grew up in South Sudan in what was the longest civil war in Africa that lasted for about 21 years. And in addition to that, in South Sudan, we have a lot of cattle breeding related conflict. So that meant a lot of life being lost and destruction. So growing up, I really yearned for a more peaceful community, a more prosperous community. Lucky enough, when I was 12 years, I left South Sudan and I went to Kakuma refugee camp in search of better education. It's a journey that later took me to ALA and later to the US. But throughout that journey, I always knew I want to come back to South Sudan. The puzzle for me was really how I would contribute to, removing or eradicating the issues in my community: poverty, conflict. And initially, I didn't know how to go about it, but after a couple of summers of volunteering in South Sudan in between my studies in the state, I came to realize that education was the bridge between the current South Sudan of conflict, of poverty, and the South Sudan we desire as a young generation. And that is a moment I embark on this journey of building secondary school that will do three things, I believe. One is to eradicate or reduce in some ways stereotype, ethnic stereotype, gender stereotype that I think stand at the root of many conflicts in South Sudan. And two, inspire and educate a generation of servant leaders, which is contrary to the current understanding of leadership in my country, who would better serve the communities, the country, and lastly, really to provide foundational skills for young generation that they can later build on, skills that I believe are fundamental for active citizenship.
Thanks, Majak, for articulating so clearly how schools and education are the bridge to eradicate poverty, to build peace, to create servant leaders, to kind of shape the society that we want to see. Deborah, I'm curious about you. You're still in university, and something calls you to start a school while still still working as a full-time student. What made you do that?
So thank you, Mr. Morake. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. So I have to mention that Manasseh School is located in the district of Moamba, the biggest and the poorest district in Kinshasa, the capital city. So most inhabitants of Moamba are villagers who originally came to the capital in case of a job. Right after my graduation at the African Leadership Academy, I went home to take my gap year. So a few years ago, I invited Melissa, my friend, to join me at a church service that had over 200 people attending. Now I was so happy because Melissa finally joined me. However, my happiness was just for a short period of time when we all heard the pastor inviting Peter to read the Bible scripture. Unfortunately, Peter couldn't read the Bible scriptures, and I couldn't read. At first, I thought it was because he was afraid of the public, just being afraid because there were so many people. But I realized that, no, I was wrong. Peter couldn't read. He was just illiterate. He was illiterate, that he couldn't read. As I was expecting it from Melissa, she was like, so young people in your church cannot read. I was shocked because, okay, fine. I was expecting it from Melissa to say something like that to me, especially because Peter was a 16 years old who just graduated from high school as an A student. In our context, being an A student, it means you have an average of at least 78%, but he couldn't read. I was very embarrassed for Peter. But as I was thinking about, I was reflecting on the incident, I realized that there was so many Peters in our community, young people who eventually graduate from high school, but they are potentially unskilled. They cannot read at all. They cannot read, they cannot write something. And potentially unskilled, thus they cannot contribute to the development of our community. That's we are still the poorest and the biggest district in Kinshasa. In this regard, I decided to train and equip, I decided to create Manasseh School so as we train and equip young people in order to change the future of our community. So that was pretty much my story and how I came about the idea of creating Manasseh. Yeah.
Thank you, Deborah. I mean, you're articulating, kind of the African Leadership Academy theory of change. You saw a problem, you found a solution, and you are iterating it to ultimately empower people. So now that we've gotten to hear a little bit about your stories, I want to pivot to Jihad. Jihad, this is, you work with schools, you work with school leaders, you work with education practitioners across the continent. And it's a difficult time to be running a school. COVID is an unprecedented crisis. But you mentioned earlier, when we were chatting earlier, that it's also an opportunity. So what opportunities does this pandemic create for schools across the continent, for school leaders across the continent? What have you seen working, and what might we carry forward with us into the future?
Thank you, Mopati. So I would like to start by saying that I don't think that COVID-19 is necessarily inspiring us to do anything different than what we should be doing anyways. But I do think that an urgency on things that maybe we spoke about a lot, but we put in the back burner. We didn't really put our money where our mouth is. For example, we didn't make the investments, etc. So I think it's just the opportunity here is that COVID is bringing urgency and putting under the spotlight what we should have been doing a long time ago. Now the question is, what are these opportunities that we're talking about? And I think one way to reframe the question for me is thinking about this crisis, which schools have managed to do well under this crisis and why? And that's the thing that we want to take from that. And we've all, everybody was affected by the crisis, but some schools did better than others. And I think the ones that did better than others had a couple things in common. One thing is that, the first is that I think the schools that did better had a philosophy of cultivating autodidactism and love of learning in their students. I think the reason a lot of our schools suffered in the crisis is because the entire learning and teaching experience is anchored and centered around the teacher. So the moment the student doesn't have access to the teacher anymore, the learning stops. So I think the schools that did well are the schools that invested way before the crisis in developing independent learners and developing kids who love learning for the sake of learning, and developing kids who know how to learn when they're alone. So even picking up a book and reading, I think we also don't read. I think culturally we have issues of kind of just reading. So I'm not even talking about technology or Zoom. Even if you're completely cut off from your teacher, if you've been cultivated to love learning or to read or to discover by yourself, you'll be in a better position than someone who was entirely reliant on the teacher. A second point was schools that did well also had invested in community building. So they had a strong culture and a strong community around them that lifted them up during the crisis. And I would give an example specifically with parent engagement. So I think a lot of schools suffered with fee collection, for example, in the crisis. Parents stopped paying for a lot of reasons. Some of it is economic hardship, right? They didn't have the money, but part of it is also a transactional relationship between the school and the parent. It's like, you give me X, I give you Y. Now you're not really giving me that X that I'm used to. So why would I pay? Or I don't want to pay, it's not a cooperative relationship. And I think the schools that had invested in a very positive, in parents in a very meaningful way years before this crisis are now reaping the benefit of that investment, because now parents are actually co-creating solutions with the school. It's not a transactional, relationship, is actually cooperative. So I would say lessons we're taking to the future is that, not even talking about investing in technology infrastructure, just the basics. We need to develop autodidactic learners in kids who actually love learning and can learn by themselves if the teacher is not there. So student-centered process of teaching and learning. And the second, we need to cultivate strong cultures, mission-driven schools that have kind of ties around them and engage parents in meaningful ways, so that when, it's good either way, but it's also something that's gonna reward you in times of crises like these.
Investing in habits of successful lifelong learners, that's what you mean by autodidactic learners, and as well as investing in a community, right, that can sustain the learning enterprise through thick and thin, so to speak. Deborah, let me ask you to chime in here. That was great, Jihad. I know that you had a particularly effective response to COVID. That your learning continued. You found creative ways to have learning continue in meaningful ways while other schools around you in Kinshasa were shutting down. Can you speak to more about what opportunities you took advantage of? What were you able to create?
So having been operating in a context where we have parents who just think that, they only have financial, when we talk about parent engagement, they only think of financial engagement, okay? So in this context, with the pandemic, right? What as the school, we are thankful as an opportunity that was given to us during the pandemic. We talk about the fact that the pandemic has given us the opportunity to have the parents committee being involved, fully involved and integrally involved in their children learning. Because right now, it's no longer about paying school fees, because they are not paying any school fees, but the parents have to facilitate their children learning at home. And it's no longer about having the teachers working at home with your children, but it's now about the parents facilitating the learning of their children at home. So we have parents, for instance, who are just coming in our school to sign the transcript. We only see them when it comes to signing the transcript and when it comes to paying the school fees. But they've never actually taken time to even check the homework of their children. But now with the pandemic, we are literally able to have the parent committee involved, having to call us. How can I facilitate my children with calculations, for instance? How can I help my children? Yes, I cannot read and write because I am illiterate, but how can I work with the tutor that you guys have assigned me? How can I work with them in order to ensure that my child is actually progressing in his learning? So I would say one of the things that we have seen as an opportunity, one thing that we struggled before, now we actually thankful because of the pandemic has been having an integral parent engagement in the children learning, because now parents, they can tell you that my child is struggling with this and I know why the child is struggling. Can you help me get to understand how I can facilitate my child with this specific topic? So these are the things that we see, and then we are thankful, and we say that we're happy because parents are working with us. And then also say that our children, they are aware that it's no longer about having a teacher in school, but they have to work on them on their own, and having the teachers, the parent as facilitators only. So these are the things.
Yeah, Deborah, I'm hearing you expanding on what Jihad has talked about, the thinking creatively about expanding the community that enables learning. I mean, I think to how Kenya has decided that the 2020 school year is going to be canceled because effectively because kids cannot be in school with their teachers. I mean, there are obviously there are real reasons for this decision, but it does raise the question of, does that mean learning stops for 2020 because students cannot be sitting in front of teachers in classrooms? So Majak, let me ask you to chime in here. We're thinking about what this crisis has revealed about what learning means and what learning can mean going forward. What's been your experience with Greenbridge in South Sudan? Oh, I think you're on mute, Majak.
Thank you, Mr. Mopati. So I was saying it's good to admit at first that schools, just like students, are a different stage of development. And this crisis means different things to different schools based on where they are in their developmental trajectory. So there's a school like Greenbelt, which I believe is more leaning toward, we are more at the stage of traditional teacher-centered. And there are other schools that I think are more autodidactic, which is what Jihad was speaking toward. And I think for a school like ours, the biggest learning opportunity is the mentorship that these crises provide. And what I mean by that is traditionally there used to be what we believe to be the ways to teach, right? But so we didn't have to think about ways to improve learning, ways to manage learning differently. But now that we can do it in the traditional way, we can have students sitting in the class. We are being forced to actually think, to create, right? And I think in that process, there's a chance to improve how learning is done, or even a chance to reinvent what learning means and what it should look like. For example, at Greenbelt, just like in Moses School here in South Sudan, and I believe in East Africa in general, there's a belief that phones are disruptive in class, right? So students are not allowed to come with phones. If you come with a phone, they'll be confiscated, right? And after the crisis, we learned that phones or technology actually provide more merit than harms, because those people that we were able to connect with benefited from some of the programs that we did during the crisis holiday, unlike those that were not able to connect. And so in that way, we are learning that what we believe traditionally to be wrong actually has a lot of advantages that we didn't bother to think about. So in that way, I think this crisis provide an opportunity for schools in what stage of development they are to pause, to think about what learning is, how learning is managed, and to reinvent how they do it.
A chance to pause, think, and pause and think about what learning should mean going forward. Surely, and I think we all accept the premise that we can't just say learning doesn't happen because of COVID, right? I mean, those would be dire consequences. So this is a time to think creatively. Before I pivot to the question, I just want to remind folks who are listening in that if you do have a question, type it into the chat. We'll have time for questions in a few minutes, so please do type it. If you do see a question that you want to hear answered, click like. Same on Facebook. Go ahead and type your questions there, and then we'll deal with them shortly. But my question now is, I was reading this UNESCO report called Education in a Post-COVID World, 9 Ideas for Public Action. It's quite an interesting read. And one argument that they make is that there needs to be investment and structural change in education in order to build resilient educational systems, equitable educational systems. So the UNESCO report says that education leaders like yourselves on this panel need to make some bold choices, some difficult choices, if we want to unlock the kind of growth and progress that we want to see. So how do we make these choices? I'm curious, like what principles should inform education leaders as they make these bold choices? What should guide their decision making? What guides your decision making in your work with schools or network of schools? Let me start with you, Jihad, and then I'll ask the others to chime in here. How do we make these bold decisions that we need to be making?
Sorry, Mopati, I had issues hearing you. Can you repeat the question?
Sure. I was just saying that I was quoting a UNESCO report that says that we need to make some structural changes to build more resilient and equitable education systems. So bold choices need to be made. What should inform these choices? What should inform the choices that education leaders in Africa are making today to shape a better education system more?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. So I have to say, okay, the short answer to that question is student learning outcomes. So when we're talking about bold decisions, we're talking about different levels in the system. So maybe a policy maker, a Minister of Education has to make some decisions, a school leader on a public school has to make some decisions, teachers have to make decisions, people like Majak and Deborah have to make decisions. So I think in all of these decisions, especially when they're a few degrees removed from the classroom, the biggest risk is that the decisions are made and investments are made in ways that don't actually impact students' outcomes at the end of the day. I think one framework that I know ALA has adopted for the past couple of years, and we're adopting it as well at the accelerator, is this idea of the Instructional Core, which you can read more about by Richard Elmore, but it's something that's been very useful for us as a frame of mind, which is this idea that whatever you do, whatever decision you make, whatever investment you make, if it does not touch the instructional core, which is either student engagement, the rigor of the content that you teach, or the teacher skills, if it doesn't touch any one of these three, then it's unlikely to affect what you want to affect or what matters. So I would say what should drive the decisions, the bold decisions going forward, is anything that can be directly linked to student learning outcomes in the instructional core.
Yeah, like fundamentally what the decisions that I'm hearing you saying, Jihad, what drives the decisions should be like what is best for learning, right? And exactly. What is best for student learning, yeah.
Well, I just want to give one small example just to clarify what that means. Right now, I think this is going to be a thing now, because post-COVID, given the lack of infrastructure in technology, the investment in technology is going to be a thing. So this is an area where people have to be careful, because investing in computer or internet doesn't mean necessarily
iPads, yeah.
Exactly, it doesn't mean necessarily impacting the student outcomes. So this is a decision that has to be very much studied, and any investment you make, really, it's okay, is this just ancillary? Is it nice to have? Is it because it looks cool? Or how does it exactly link to what matters and what the reason we're here at the end of the day is to see improvement in learning of students. So I would say that's how we should drive the decision. We should examine things and question them and not get lost in what sometimes could be a nice to have, but not necessarily a core driver of change.
Thank you. That's really important to keep in mind. Majak, let me ask you, as the president and CEO of an educational institution in a tricky time, what drives the decisions you make? What informs the principles you make? And just unmute yourself. There we go.
Yeah, I think there are two key elements to that for me. And I would speak to decision making at my level as a school leader. Number one is research evidence in terms of what work in education, what work in classroom. So over the last couple of years, I have had to do a lot more research into what learning actually means, how we do it better, and what people have proven to work there. Of course, in doing that, you have to be mindful of your context, because every idea really is based on the content. But that is one thing I usually consider in deciding what policy we want to implement. The second piece to that is the level of understanding and buy-in from my team. So in this case, it could be the teachers, right? Or other staff members that I'm working with. And the main reason why buy-in and level of understanding is very crucial is sometimes if I'm the person who actually like understand the research, the evidence, and how it will impact, and that the teacher, let's say, doesn't understand, usually they would oppose, and the policy, in most cases, prove counterproductive. But if I'm patient enough to actually like do more training, provide more evidence, and get a buy-in of the teacher, there's usually a chance for them to actually like get out of the circle of comfort and try the new idea. And usually with the creativity, it works better. So I think for me, those two elements have been key: research evidence and the level of buy-in and understanding from the people that are actually implementing the policies we are making as a school.
You know, I'm taking notes here, Majak, and you know, we talk about the importance of research and buy-in. I think it's important for people to know that, you know, although we often, you know, the national results come out and we lament and we complain that the results are poor, the results are getting worse. At Greenbelt in South Sudan, Majak's first class sat their national exams. The first ever class sat their national exams in December, and ended up with the fourth highest performing, ended up being the fourth highest performing school in South Sudan at their first try. So you want to talk about buy-in and what Jihad talked about, getting focus on the instructional core and really showing what's possible. If we have that buy-in, if we have that culture of learning, if we have a strong instructional core, there's some great stuff happening over in South Sudan at Greenbelt. So let's take a few questions from the audience. Thank you to my panelists for engaging with this conversation about like, what does learning mean? What should learning mean? What can schools look like in the future? Deborah, the first question is from you. It comes from somebody from Ghana, Brian Boafo from Ghana. And Brian, if I understand you correctly, he's saying, great, I hear this idea of expanding the community of people who can support learning, as Jihad said. And you were able to, at Manas in Kinshasa, get parents to facilitate learning. And Brian wants to know, parents, you know, in this COVID time, parents are busy, parents have work. What do we do? And some parents just aren't able to, don't have the competency to support the children to learn at home. So what do we do in those situations when parents just are busy or unable to facilitate learning, or unable to lean in the way that you and maybe Jihad were calling for?
Oh, thank you for the question. So I have to mention one thing, which is that currently, most people here in Kinshasa are at home. Like most of the workers are not working. So most parents are at home. They are not working. They are all at home. So for the parents who are working, there's always, if the father is not available, we work with the mother. So in the context where we're operating, we always have to work with one parent who's available. And how they make, we also work with their timing as well, their timetable. We just don't impose them our timing. It doesn't work like that. And for the parents who cannot read and write, we have been able, as a school, we have been able to reach out several community service organizations in order to secure tutors for those parents. tutors work with the parents and the kids. Basically, they work to support the parents. They are not doing the parent's job, no. Obviously, when the parent cannot read, therefore cannot support the child, therefore we assuming that they cannot support the child. But there's simple activities like counting, they can help. So the tutors that work with the parent and the kids, they are there to support the parent, because we have seen that there are things that they cannot do. So this is how I think I can answer the question.
And I want to ask Jihad to build on this. Jihad, Anwarite, who is a member of, Anwarite from Kenya, who's a member of ALA's most recent graduating class, wants to know that, how can, if parents are part of this expanded community that you talked about earlier, Jihad, how do we, if parents don't get the instructional core, if they don't understand the school's mission and vision, how can they be meaningfully part of this expanded community that the school is calling for?
Interesting. I mean, my question back to the person who asked the question is why are they not part of it? So I just want to know if there was effort made for the parents not to know what the school's mission is, etc. So I would imagine that if effort has been put into engaging parents, even kind of in difficult environments, because in our accelerator, we do have a range of schools with different circumstances and the environments they live in. And I haven't seen that engagement is necessarily a function of resources. It's a lot around mission and the culture that the school has been able to develop. So I would say it's possible. I think with just some effort. But the idea of instructional core, I don't know what was the motivation behind the question. I don't know if the question was that some parents would push for things that would not be for the instructional core and that the school would feel compelled to respond to that. I don't know what the motivation behind it was, but I would say that parents, it's more important, I guess, for the school leader to be thinking in that framework. I think even if your parents are not thinking that way, as long as you engage them in a meaningful way, and also make sure that they kind of their expectations of you as a school are also kind of fulfilled, or there's a conversation happening there, then I would imagine there is a way there. There's a way to make it work.
What it sounds like you're envisioning is deliberate relationship building between schools and community, schools and parents, that is not just around, as Deborah said, fees or discipline, right? That there's a conversation about learning, about competencies, about empowerment, about what can our students do, what are they learning, right? And then maybe that's part of the key to a more resilient educational system. We got a question from, I believe, former ALA faculty member Matthew Young, former Dean of Learning and Innovation, now currently at Germantown Friends School in Philadelphia, United States. Matthew has a practical question for you, Majak. Nuts and bolts, how are you addressing student and educator safety and concerns about returning to getting back to school in this time of the pandemic? So how are you thinking about safety of students? How are you thinking about safety of educators in the days of Corona?
Thank you, Matthew. So here in South Sudan, we still schools are still closed. We were only able to reopen for our candidate class, which is grade 12, last week on Thursday. And the main reason for doing that really is to ensure that we have less people on campus and in less interaction in that case. And for those that have returned, so now we have one grade and all of our staff back. And really we are doing our best to follow the guideline that have been provided by WHO and by the country health ministry, and that is ensuring that every student who come to campus actually has a mask. We provide washing facility at the gate, so you must wash when you come, and if you exit and going for lunch and other things that you do within the school. One thing that we had to do at the school level was we divided up our class. So we used to have, right, the class that we have, the senior class is about 100 students, and we had two streams, term one. But when they came back, we divided them up into 4 streams of 25, just to ensure that we reduce the number, the contacts. As instead of having 50, having less number of students in the class. The same kind of procedure goes for staffs, really. And one of the things we had to do when everybody came back was just one day for orienting people and telling them that we seriously we believe. Funny enough, there are some people that don't think this crisis is real. So we took a day off just to emphasize that this is real, and the policies that we are putting in place must be adhered to, just to ensure that everybody is safe. So that is what we are doing at this point, and we are not sure if the whole school is going to resume or not. If it does, then we'll have to sit down again and see what we'll do to ensure that everybody is safe.
Sounds like a measured approach from Greenbelt. So a couple more questions are coming in. We probably have we keep them coming, whether on Facebook or on the webinar here. But there are 2 variations of the same question from, we've got Ariel, who's a current ALA student, and somebody else from Facebook who want to think about the role of online learning, right? It's resurgent, ed tech and educational and e-learning platforms are maybe on the rise. Ariel frames it this way, do you think Africa is ready for e-learning? And the other questions are, will these innovations work? What are the drawbacks? So I might ask Jihad to, since you started talking about this earlier, maybe you can start, and then Deborah, maybe you can chime in if you feel comfortable, just thinking about, are these e-learning, how are you guys thinking about e-learning, Majak, as well?
Yeah. So, I mean, this is, so the one thing that this unveiled is definitely the discrepancy between, so when we talk Africa, it's not the same. So some communities, some people did have access and the majority did not. I think one thing to just mention is that there are low-tech solutions. So even before COVID, I know of solutions in East Africa that are based on feature phone, so text-based programs that have been running even in the absence of COVID. So I think it's not, there is a world of low-tech solutions that can go mass and can touch people who are who have less access to just internet and broadband. But in terms of, if you're thinking e-learning as in kind of the internet-based solutions, the answer is we can do it tomorrow. It's not, we're not ready today, not at a massive scale. It would be a lie to say that. But I think we should, that's why I started by talking about things before even technology that you can do, which is autodidactism, love of learning, student-centered processes of teacher learning. Those are things you can do without technology that can actually benefit you both, under crisis or out of crisis.
Yeah, I keep coming back to this idea of a resilient education system. I think it's something like 18%, somewhere between 11 and 18% of students have access, reliable access to home internet on the continent. So we don't want to exacerbate inequality. Like, let's think about what other tools can foster learning that, that don't require impossible solutions tomorrow. This one is for you, Majak and Deborah. Let me start with Deborah and then Majak. People want to know, a couple of people have asked, what does it take to start a school? Right, so maybe you can give us 1 or 2 lessons each about, like, maybe some people, we've got some education entrepreneurs somewhere on the continent who are thinking about adding their footprint in their community. What does it take to start a school, Deborah?
It's a great question. What does it take? I think the first thing that one has to know is, why are you starting the school? Why exactly? Why do you want to start? And because in my case was because I was very embarrassed. I mean, I was very embarrassed. And it was, I mean, that was my community. I grew up there. I was born there. I grew up there. And I had an opportunity to go to the African Leadership Academy. That was a privilege to me because with my parents, I did not have the opportunity. I had an opportunity to not study in my community because my mother was into education, and I had a scholarship to study in one of the best school in the capital. So it was more of a give back to my community. So the most important thing that one has to know is, why am I starting the school? Because I am starting the school because first I want to give back, and then I don't want to be embarrassed in anymore. I don't want to be embarrassed. And the moment you clarify the why you want to start the school, then it's important to check your network and make use of the network that you have. Because I guess one person asked, how did I build the school? And I'm like, I just used the network that was available to me. And then, yeah, this is how I happen to have the land, because I just ask the people around me, because we never know. Yeah. And the next thing that you want to know is to just start, because I did not start as a school. I just started like a tutoring program. I just started. And then my friend came, and then the other friend talked to other people, and then you just start, and then you use the network that is available to you. I think that's how I can explain it.
Understand your why, understand your purpose. Majak, what does it take to start a school? Speak to the would-be edupreneurs, I believe is the term out there.
Yeah, to add on to what Deborah just said, I think the other element is a team to work with. So though I started this work by myself, the idea originated from me. The first thing I did actually the summer of 2015 was I came back to South Sudan from the US. I took a whole summer, came back, gathered some people that, pitch my idea to them and see if they would like it. And that team of people initially had 7 people, became really crucial in helping steer the wheel of the projects then while I was caught up in other things in the US. So I think somebody that you can work with will be great. I believe the other piece really is the willingness to start small, be humble enough to start small. And I think that is what Deborah was touching on at the last minute there. We started our school with a very simple structure that cost us about like $8,000, right? And now we have a bigger building that costs hundreds of dollars. So of course, we don't make our value as a school based on that, but it's I think a symbol of where we started and where you go. So if you start small and your reasons are genuine enough, people will see it and they will support you and you'll do a lot bigger.
For those of you who are sort of new to the African Leadership Academy community, these answers are textbook ALA alum, right? They're talking about the power of networks, the power of collaboration, the power of leveraging the shared strength and shared resources across borders to cultivate an idea. So if you are, if you want to know more about ALA, just listen to the ways in which these young people, these education leaders answer these questions. So Jihad, I think we have time we have 1 or 2 more questions. Jihad, there's somebody who wants to kind of tease this question around access and equity. And they want to know, how do you balance, we have this big digital divide, right? Some people can transition to online learning, some can't. How do we balance learning by reaching out to those students in such a dilemma during this pandemic period and even after the pandemic period? So I guess the question is just around how do you balance, how do you balance the digital divide, I suppose?
Yeah, okay. So, well, I will guess, okay, let me answer it twofold. So one is kind of technology side of things. I think what a lot of people had to do, even teachers who had a classroom of a mixed classroom where some students were more privileged and others didn't have access, what they had to do is to find kind of the common denominator and go with that. So if it's going to be texting, if it's going to be radio, I mean, radio is actually popular in Africa and around the world in a lot of communities where the internet was not accessible. So radio, you can find radio in a lot of rural areas, and sometimes, I'll speak about when there is even no radio, but radio and TV have been low-tech solutions that I would say kind of equalized access to some extent. I think there were areas where there was not even in TV or radio, and those were solutions like what Deborah was saying, and actually the Anzisha Prize winner from the Anzisha program is also leader in a school in the RC, and her solution was to actually, the teacher was going to the students' houses. So the investment of the school became one of masks in gloves, in gear, and then the teacher would go to each student and teach them individually. So that was the innovation. Yeah, so it was big, but literally they didn't have even access to radio. So the teacher was traveling. It meant less time. So it wasn't as, the instruction time was definitely reduced, but they still did something. So I would say there are solutions, but so there was the fold of my answer was around this idea. So we've been talking a lot, I guess, in this conversation about maximizing potential. So I think this is the language that you were kind of referring to. We're all here because we really want to bring quality education to students. And I think one thing to think about at least in the accelerator we believe in, is that when the school is in a low resource environment, the first thing you need to do is to cover the basic needs. So the schools that are in low resource environments that do well, at least cover food. The children are not hungry when they come to class, because if they're hungry, learning is unlikely to take place. So at least in the accelerator program, whenever we talk about these lofty ideals of we want your kids to have critical thinking and to be autodidactic, etc., we also couple it with, but are the basic needs covered? So we have a fund specifically for vulnerable children. So the kids can't be hungry, there needs to be shelter, there needs to be safety, and then we can talk about the bigger things. So I would say this is my view on this question.
Articulating the hierarchy of needs, so to speak. I think we have time for one more question, I think. Just one more question, if Ms. Kalala, is that correct? I want to just get Ms. Nolizwe Mtlaba, who is a staff member at African Leadership Academy, who's curious about mental health during this really tough time, right? She's curious as leaders in your institutions, Deborah and Majak, how are you taking care of your mental health during this period, or modeling that practice for your fellow educators and for your learners? So how are you taking care of yourselves, and how do you model, good mental health for the people that you work with? It's a great question, Ms. Mtlaba. Perhaps you can start with Deborah, and then Majak, you can take us home.
How do I take care of myself? I think during this time, obviously it's a stressful time where, a lot of complaints are coming, a lot of challenges, but one thing that I usually do is to just take a break with everything and write. I think it's more into more with the idea of like spending some time for yourself, spending some time with yourself, and encouraging my educators as well, whilst they are working with the kids, whether whilst they are working with the kids as well, to take some time for themselves, because you take some time for yourself where you just do what makes you happy. For me personally, what makes me happy is whenever I'm into music and I invest my time in that. And whenever I'm also trying to be vulnerable, that also helped me as well. So I think what I encourage my educators, my teachers to do is to take some time for themselves. So that's the reason why we don't occupy them the entire day. We only work for 3 hours and then they have the rest of the time for themselves during this pandemic. And for the teachers, or for the kids, what we actually trying to do, since the pandemic crisis have started, we try to check on our kids at least twice a week and see how they are doing and interact with the parents and how they can assist the kid as well. Yeah, this is what we've been doing so far in order to ensure our mental health as a community, because right now people are stressing about like financial crisis, parents are not being paid, but just a small call, you just call them and then check whether they are fine. It also helps. This is what we can do since we cannot meet in a school. We can just reach out to them over the phone. This is what we've been doing so far.
Thank you, Deborah. Majak, 30 seconds. What's a quick thing that you do? I'll give you like 20, 30 seconds for this one.
Thank you for asking that question. I think it's something that we can do better at, and honestly, I don't think we're doing well at Greenbelt. At a personal level, I think I'm better off because I can have more flexible schedule. One thing we have done since we resumed for teachers really is to allow them, if they have issues at home, given now we have quarter of the school, if they have issues at home, we give them time to actually go and deal with those who's come back without cutting the salaries or anything like that. But yeah, I think it's a question we need to think about more deeply as an institution and see how best we can support them on a more professional level.
Thank you, Jihad. Thank you, Majak. Thank you, Deborah. What I've heard loud and clear is, if we're trying to think about how education can be better tomorrow than it was today, than it was yesterday, we need to understand our why, understand our purpose, and define kind of expand our understanding of what it means to learn, and bring other people on board, bring communities on board. Right? Let's not have the same staid system that we've had for a long time. We need to leverage our networks. We need to, and that might mean in the community, it might mean parents, it might mean across borders, right? But this idea of shared, a community that's invested in the learning enterprise and not just the teachers in the school. And getting to a place where we're building resilient education systems. I think that sounds like the solution. So to conclude, thank you so much, Jihad, Deborah, and Majak. Let me hand over to my colleague, Ma Khalalelo to close. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mopati. Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. I am Khalalelo, jumping in at the very last minute as the coordinator of the executive seminars and part of the team that brings you this series bi-weekly. Thank you, Mopati, for hosting us tonight. I think your experience as an educator was evident and helped us follow the conversation very easily. So thank you for your time. And to our guests, thank you very much to Jihad, Deborah, Majak. It's an honor to have our alumni jump at the opportunity to plow back into the ALA community. And your stories are inspiring, and your perspectives, I think, on how to move education forward are exactly what the series aims to do in all of us, right? To have ourselves revisit how we can change the future of this continent in education or in our respective sectors. And to everyone who's joined us today from wherever you are across the continent and across the world, thank you for joining us. The series Redefine Expectations continues in 2 weeks' time, and we will be visiting the topic, the potential, or rather our alumni's, let me rephrase that. In 2 weeks' time, we'll be looking at the topic of how our alumni are unlocking Africa's economic potential through the creative arts. That's going to be happening on the 23rd of July, so look out for our social media platforms on how to register, including our Eventbrite page. So please share with your circles. Thank you once again for joining us, and good night.